The Pittsburgh Steelers finally pulled the trigger after months of speculation about whether or not they would trade or retain George Pickens for the 2025 season. They pulled the trigger, sending him to Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the full details of the trade are as follows. The Cowboys acquire wide receiver George Pickens, as well as a 2027 sixth-round pick in exchange for a 2026 third-round pick and a 2027 fifth-round pick. Coincidentally, that is almost the exact same compensation that the Steelers netted 6 years ago when they traded then-star wide receiver Antonio Brown to the Las Vegas Raiders. And here's one misconception. Here's one storyline that I do want to dispel from the Pittsburgh side of things. We need to stop putting a player like George Pickens and a person like George Pickens in the same boat as an Antonio Brown. And we, as a collective, the royal we, need to start breaking up what off-field issues actually is. Because for the longest time, it has been you either have on-field issues, which is your play, your capabilities, what's going on in between the lines. And then there's off-field issues, which has just been a catch-all for anything other than an upstanding citizen. Well, George Pickens has locker room issues. That is the reports that he showed up to meetings late, that he didn't show up to the game on Christmas Day on time, the eye black and everything included. The negative headlines that George Pickens brought to the Steelers were locker room issues. Meanwhile, I've seen comparisons saying it's another Antonio Brown. And the fact that he's a supremely talented wide receiver that gets in his own way, yes, I can see that comparison. But outside of that, there is nothing similar about the two. Pickens has locker room issues. Antonio Brown had off-field issues, legal issues. So that's the one thing that I want to say going out of this. Let's make sure that we separate off-field issues from locker room issues, because it was the locker room issues that were the reason the Steelers had any thought of trading George Pickens in the first place. Now, Pickens was their 2022 second-round pick, and honestly, he'd been performing as such in his 3 years with the organization, averaging 58 receptions, 947 yards, and 4 touchdowns, including a season last year where, despite missing 3 games, Pickens netted 53 receptions, 900 total yards, and only 3 touchdowns. That's the number that was always interesting for George Pickens, is he wouldn't find the end zone very frequently, 12 touchdowns over 3 years. But that was an issue that the Steelers were dealing with kind of everywhere, not just with their star wide receiver. But you look at George Pickens' ranks last year, despite missing the 3 games, tied for 54th in receptions, 32nd in receiving yards, and tied for 81st in touchdowns. That is a player that, to me, performed better when in than those numbers would suggest. And that's exactly what the Dallas Cowboys are getting. They're getting a supremely talented wide receiver who has the potential, if he stays healthy in a season, to put up top 10 numbers. I know it doesn't say it there, but before he went down with an injury, George Pickens was top 5 in receiving yards in the National Football League in 2024. He misses those 3 games, comes back, doesn't really put a stamp on those last couple because that's what the Steelers were doing in those weeks. And all of a sudden he drops down to 32nd in the NFL in receiving yards. But at the end of the day, on field, there's nothing wrong with this player. Yeah, eventually, or maybe not eventually, but every once in a while you have to call into question his effort. Every once in a while you have things that happen like the end of the Cleveland Browns game in Cleveland in 2024, where instead of going up for a jump ball, of which he is the target, he is the intended guy in the end zone to be able to high point the ball and come down with it, he's fighting in the back of the end zone with the Cleveland Browns secondary. So there are issues like that, but the talent is there. And if you can get him to just focus on football and not do any of the other stuff, that's going to be a really nice pickup for the Dallas Cowboys. And they really need it, because last year was disappointing for them. And now they look around and, well, in their division is the reigning, defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles that are looking like they're going to be just as strong this year as they were last. And you have the upstart Washington Commanders. It's turning into an arms race in the NFC East, and the Cowboys needed to add another weapon desperately on the offensive side of the football, and that's exactly what they get for Dak Prescott and exactly what they get to be opposite of CeeDee Lamb in the wide receiver core. So for them on the field, this is a good get. Now the question becomes, can they mitigate the locker room issues? Can they mitigate the effort questions that we have seen time and time again with George Pickens in the NFL? And can they mitigate the fact that other opposing cornerback rooms, defenses can get under his skin and just take him out of the game mentally? We've seen it time and time again. The Browns game was example number one. The other example that I think of is that Jacksonville Jaguars game in his second season where he was breaking out. He was becoming a star wide receiver. He was having consecutive weeks of successful games and successful stat lines. And all of a sudden, in a big matchup against Jacksonville, a lot of talking happens and they're able to just take him out of the game completely. Now, he did score a touchdown in that one, but at that point, it was 20-3, and he made it 20-10 in the fourth quarter. So it really didn't mean much for the Steelers in the long run. So if they can mitigate all of those locker room issues, they got themselves a really good player. And as far as the Steelers are concerned, they clear out another diva wide receiver. And I say diva with air quotes because I think they come in all different shapes and sizes. One of those, Antonio Brown. I already talked about how the circumstances were different, but you can put them in the same bucket as, yeah, they're not on the straight and narrow. They're not an upstanding citizen when it comes to the football aspect of it and the locker room aspect of it. So they clear out another diva receiver. They did it with Brown. They did it with Deontay Johnson last offseason, and now they do it with George Pickens. But where does it leave them? It leaves them in a very similar situation to last year, and that is what I have heard over the past 24 hours since this news came out is why would they do this and put themselves in the same situation, which is they have a clear-cut number one receiver that has star receiver potential. And in this case, it's DK Metcalf. So he has proven to be a star receiver. And then you have a lot of question marks, right? You brought in Robert Woods, but that's more of a 4-5. At least everybody on the outside is looking at that as a 4-5. We'll have to wait and see how the Steelers view Robert Woods, but you bring in Robert Woods, who's a veteran, who is not going to be a number two. And I think that much everybody can agree on. You have Calvin Austin, who stepped up last year, had over 500 receiving yards, but do you expect him to step up and really be in that number two role? I think a lot of us are saying that that is questionable. And then you have Roman Wilson. Do the Steelers have faith in Roman Wilson? That is a huge question for them moving forward because last year, obviously, he dealt with injuries, got injured early in training camp, which cost him very valuable time in the eyes of Mike Tomlin. So he misses the beginning of the season. He comes back, and what does Mike Tomlin say? Well, he essentially needs to go through a training camp before we put him out there on the field in game action. And he works his way back, plays against the Las Vegas Raiders, gets hurt again, goes on the IR, and we don't see him for the rest of the season. Now, there are reports saying that he was healthy by the end of the season, but the Steelers just weren't quite comfortable putting him out there on the field at that point in the season. Why? This is a guy that you picked up off of a national champion Michigan team. Why would you not have faith that he could go out there and give you more than a Van Jefferson, give you more than a Mike Williams, who they were refusing to use, give you more than a Ben Skoranek in a wide receiver role? I like Ben Skoranek. Don't get me wrong. He is a great utility player, a great special teamer. But you're telling me you didn't have more faith in your third-round pick, Roman Wilson, than you did in a journeyman in Ben Skoranek at that point of the season? So I have questions about Roman Wilson. I have faith in Roman Wilson, but I need to know, do the Pittsburgh Steelers have that same faith? Why did they not turn to Roman Wilson when everything was going wrong for the offense in weeks 14 onward late last season? So those are the questions that are surrounding the Steelers now, following this trade. I mean, a lot of people have also mentioned you can still go out and get a number two. The speculation is starting to rise on Brandon Ayuk again out of San Francisco. That would be interesting to dive back into that drama. Amari Cooper is on the free agent market. I know he didn't have a great end of the year with the Buffalo Bills, but still a guy that you could see come in here, be that veteran number two, and maybe if a guy like Roman Wilson establishes himself, can cede the spot to Roman Wilson, and Amari Cooper moves down to a number 3/a 3-4 shared role with a guy like Calvin Austin. There are different avenues that they could go. DJ Moore has been thrown out there, I believe, by 93.7 The Fan. That would be interesting because I think the whole reason that George Pickens ended up on the trade block or the trade conversation was even happening was because, well, it didn't seem like the Steelers were going to end up paying him. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not willing to pay any wide receiver, at least a second wide receiver, because we saw them pay DK Metcalf $150 million a couple months ago. So the fact is, they're probably going with a rookie quarterback next year. That's what they're loading all these picks up for, is the draft in Pittsburgh, potentially to get their guy. So you're going to have some money to throw around. Do they end up doing it on two different receivers? That much remains to be seen, but it felt like they weren't going to do that with DK Metcalf and George Pickens specifically. All of those red flags, if you will, the locker room issues, the fact that everybody could get under his skin, the effort questions, that seemed to be what was in the way of having the Steelers ink George Pickens, or at the very least, present as if they were willing to ink George Pickens to a long-term big money deal. And I think that raises another question as to whether or not this was the right move for the Steelers. Was George Pickens going to play? I put this out on my Twitter yesterday. That's the biggest question that could answer a lot of the why of this trade. And it's the one question we aren't going to get an answer to. Was George Pickens going to play on the last year of his deal, with a lot of people wondering if there was even the prospect of a new one coming down the pike from the Pittsburgh Steelers? Because if not, if he was going to hold out, if he was going to request a trade until he got a new contract or was traded, then at that point, the why is answered, and you look at what you got back for him and you say, okay, bygones be bygones, this was going to happen anyway. But I think that is the biggest question that unfortunately we will never get an answer to, because that was, and I said it back when I was on All Steelers Talk many times when talking about the George Pickens trade speculation. That is the ominous cloud in the distance of the offseason that eventually we are going to have to deal with. Is George Pickens going to play on a contract year? Didn't seem like the Steelers were overly anxious to ink him to a new deal. So if that's the case, if we got the training camp and he still was not under contract, or under a new contract, I should say, because he has 1 year left, would he have played? Would he have participated? Because if not, then this is 100% the move. And to me, there is no argument to the otherwise. If he would have, then you can make the argument that, well, you trade him now, you get something back for him, or you keep him in the fold and you give yourself a chance at making some noise in 2025. It felt like, again, speculation on my part, it felt like, considering everything that we had seen, the questions off the field, the questions in the locker room, I should say, it felt like to me that they were on a collision course towards a holdout and potentially a trade request. And if that's the case, then there's no question that this was the move to make. And as a lot of people are saying, this is the best they could get back for him. They weren't going to get a second-round pick for a guy who only has 3 years of experience and does have all these red flags. That a third-rounder was the best they could get, and that's what they ended up getting. So we'll see how it all falls out from here. George Pickens might have a tremendous season with the Dallas Cowboys, and maybe, just maybe, that third-round pick that Pittsburgh netted in this trade helps give them their next franchise quarterback. But that's why you don't give out trade grades right after the trade, because, well, we have to see how it all works out. But at the end of the day, George Pickens is a member of the Dallas Cowboys, something that we speculated upon, something that we probably thought about a little bit, but something that is still crazy to say is a reality for current day NFL talk. So Pickens to the Cowboys, Steelers getting a fresh start in their wide receiver room, now led by number 4, DK Metcalf. I'll have to wait and see. Does he go back to 14? Can he go back to 14 now that they've probably already created all the jerseys and sold a bunch of them? I don't know. Small, insignificant storyline, but one that, I'm going to keep an eye on. But that's going to do it for this video. Make sure that you click the like button down below. Make sure you leave a comment what your thoughts are on the Pittsburgh Steelers trading of George Pickens, and make sure that you hit the subscribe button for more videos like this, some NHL videos, some professional wrestling videos, kind of a catch-all at the channel at Nick Belsky. But that's going to do it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.